On August 21, 1976, the United States military activated a staggering array of combat power. They mobilized over 800 troops and readied aircraft carriers and placed strategic bombers on immediate standby. The objective for this massive force was to cut down a single poplar tree. Just 3 days earlier, the joint security area was defined by this kind of suffocating tension. In this small patch of the DMZ, North and South Korean soldiers stood face to face, separated by nothing more than a line on the ground. When Captain Arthur Boniface and First Lieutenant Mark Barrett led a team into the zone to prune a tree, the tension snapped. North Korean soldiers moved in with axes and clubs, beating the 2 American officers to death in a matter of minutes. What began as a routine maintenance task had instantly transformed into a flashpoint that could ignite a global war. This left Washington in a strategic trap. If the U.S. did nothing, they would signal to the world that their officers could be murdered without consequence. However, a direct military retaliation risked a full-scale war, drawing in nuclear-armed superpowers. President Gerald Ford and his commanders needed a third way. They required a response that projected absolute, overwhelming resolve without firing a single shot. Operation Paul Bunyan was designed as a psychological siege. It was a calculated display of force intended to freeze the enemy in place while the tree was finally removed. On the morning of August 21st, the operation went live. Engineers drove straight to the tree and began work with chainsaws. They were protected by a 60-man security detail. Crucially, these soldiers were armed with sidearms and wooden axe handles. By carrying axe handles, the U.S. and South Korean troops sent a specific message. They were signaling a readiness to fight a brutal melee on the exact terms North Korea had set 3 days prior. Behind the engineers, a perimeter of combat troops stood watch at the barbed wire, their rifles trained on the North Korean guard posts. While these men on the ground acted as a provocation, they were actually the bait for a much larger trap hovering just out of sight. Just behind the tree line, 27 helicopters, including heavily armed Cobra gunships, waited for any sign of North Korean movement. Above them, F-4 Phantom jets and F-111 bombers orbited on standby, while naval task forces moved into position offshore. At the highest tier, B-52 bombers flew patterns close enough to the DMZ to saturate North Korean radar screens, reminding Pyongyang that nuclear-capable assets were already in the air. This is a visualization of escalation dominance. North Korean forces were effectively trapped. If they engaged the ground troops, they would be hit by helicopters. If they launched aircraft, they would face the Phantoms. Every possible move was met with a ring of superior firepower. For 42 minutes, the North Koreans watched from across the line. They were entirely paralyzed by the sheer scale of the overmatch. The tree was cut down to a stump. Not a single shot was fired, because the U.S. had demonstrated that any escalation would be met with total destruction. The response worked. North Korea eventually dismantled several of their own guard posts and took the rare step of issuing an official expression of regret. The event highlights a core pillar of Cold War doctrine, that projecting a desire for peace can sometimes be interpreted as an invitation to aggression. It presents a fundamental paradox. Often, the most effective way to prevent a conflict is to prove that you are completely prepared to fight one. Today, the JSA looks different because of those 42 minutes. The borders were redrawn, and a memorial stands where the tree once was, honoring the 2 officers lost in the ambush. Operation Paul Bunyan remains a definitive study in consoled strength, a reminder of the razor-thin line between a managed peace and total annihilation.